Headed to SoFi Stadium? Ride the Culver City Bus Line 99, the SoFi Express. Just $2 base fare for a round trip from Westfield, Culver City on weekend game days. We're hiring too. Learn more at culvercitybus.com or call 310-253-6500.
All right, good afternoon. Getting right down to business here. We are doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons right after Guy Benson at 3 and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms. Mixed finish for stocks today. Gold, meanwhile, continues to hover at or near record highs, above $3,600 an ounce here at the moment. Tech stocks revved up with the NASDAQ leading the gains on Wall Street, fueled by shares of Alphabet and Apple today. Apple moving higher. Alphabet shares jumped more than 9% after Google avoided what could have been a worse antitrust penalty, federal judge allowing Alphabet Google to keep both its Chrome browser and its partnership with Apple. Bitcoin and gold both rose today. We see a Bitcoin hovering at around 111,000, just shy of 112,000 here at the moment. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 25 points, the S&P 500 of 33, and the NASDAQ up 218 points. The yield in the 10-year note at 4.22%. We did get the Beige Book survey from the Federal Reserve today. Businesses were hesitant to hire because of weaker sales and uncertainty tied to U.S. trade wars. The Federal Reserve said in its Beige Book report, tariffs have only exacerbated inflation by a moderate or modest amount so far, according to that assessment. Shares of American Bitcoin, a Bitcoin mining and treasury company backed by President Trump's two eldest sons, surged as much as 110% today before pulling back in its first day of trading after completing a merger with NASDAQ-listed Gryphon Digital Mining. The ticker symbol on this American Bitcoin is ABTC. We see the price of gold at the moment hovering at around 3,617. Silver has been getting a pop this week, shy of $42 an ounce, and the platinum continues to shine at around $1,441 an ounce. Joining us live now, the one and only Steve Forbes, president of Forbes Media, which includes Forbes magazine, author of numerous books, including his latest, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Steve Forbes, thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Good to be with you, Frank. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us here on the line today, and give us your assessment of things here at the moment with obviously a lot going on the geopolitical front that's buffeting things. We're on a historic day here, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, which is being a very big celebration going on in China as the communist Chinese try to rewrite history here. Give us your assessment of things here at the moment.
Well, in terms of what's happening overseas, it's rather ominous. That meeting this week that China held in Shanghai for that organization they have there. The big news is that India showed up and even held hands with Vladimir Putin, literally. And this goes to show that in terms of the global situation, China thinks it's on a roll, that even though it has domestic problems, they're asserting more and more dominance in the world and replacing the U.S. as the pace setter in the world. And in terms of India, I think we made a huge mistake putting on a huge tariff on India and not putting a commensurate tariff on China for buying Russian oil. We've alienated India. India is crucial in terms of facing up to China. But now by damaging the Indian economy, we're driving India to feel they have to make amends and do some kowtowing to China. And Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine is where unfortunately, Putin still thinks he can win that war, even though he's sacrificing 30 to 40,000 men a month. He thinks that Ukraine will eventually be demoralized by his incessant attacks of murdering civilians, and that the U.S. and Europe will tire of the conflict and force Ukraine to do an agreement that, in effect, has Russia controlling Ukraine. So in terms of Ukraine, there's talk of sanctions. That's good and nice. We can apply some very effective ones, including seizing the $300 billion of bank reserves that are frozen in Europe and that belong to Russian banks, and use that money to provide Ukraine with weapons that it needs. The only way you're going to get a peace agreement, sadly, in Ukraine is by giving Ukraine the weapons it needs to push back the Russians. They're not going to push the Russians out of Ukraine, but what they can do is if they see some push back the Russian offensive, and the Russian military realizes that it's not going to salami slice its way to a victory, I think that's going to cause a profound crisis in the Kremlin, and only then will Putin agree to a settlement that leaves Ukraine as a truly independent and secure country.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, chairman of Forbes Media, and of course the Middle East about to observe, it's hard to believe, the second anniversary of the Hamas terror attack on Israel back on October 7th of 2023. And what's your view of what's happening there, and whether Israel will ultimately have to take over that entire area, or will the hostages ultimately be freed?
Well, unfortunately, Hamas has taken the position that as long as it has some hostages, it can survive. And I think the government in Israel, the Netanyahu government, has concluded they're going to have to wipe out Hamas entirely. That does not mean that Israel is going to reoccupy or take over Gaza. Remember, Gaza was occupied after the Six-Day War. Israel pulled out of Gaza back in 2005. Hamas took over shortly thereafter, and we've seen what's happened since. So the Israelis do not want a repeat of trying to occupy long-term Gaza, but they also want a situation where Hamas cannot rise again. So unfortunately there, I think some fighting is going to take place to wipe out Hamas in the next few weeks. And then hopefully then we can get a peace in Gaza, and the rebuilding can begin. And unfortunately, Israel has been on the receiving end of bad propaganda. They've not handled the PR on this well at all. They've tried to get supplies in, but Hamas blocks them. The UN has been useless in this situation. It's a dreadful situation. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have some more fighting ahead before this thing is resolved.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, and certainly all of these geopolitical concerns, certainly one of the reasons why we're seeing gold hit record highs this week. Steve Forbes, inflation, which you're the expert on, could be the other reason. What's your reaction to gold hitting all-time highs here above $3,600 an ounce as we speak? And what's your assessment here on the inflation front?
Well, unfortunately, on the inflation front, even though the official numbers have been coming down, well, what is happening with the rise in the price of gold, that's always a sign that we're going to get monetary inflation in the future. The administration, and I hate to say this, unfortunately, the administration believes that they want to have a slight devaluation of the dollar as a way of improving our trade balance. That's a false economic theory. By the way, President George W. Bush tried that tactic, his economic team in the early 2000s, and that set the stage for the crisis of 2007, 2008, and we're still recovering. We still haven't fully recovered from that disaster. Weakening a currency, great countries have strong currencies, sound currencies, reliable currencies, and so I think the markets are reacting to the prospect that we may have a repeat of what happened in the early 2000s. I think that's the big reason why gold is going up, especially as it looks like at some point, maybe not now, but certainly in coming months, the Trump administration will have its appointees on the Federal Reserve Board, and that'll mean a weak dollar. Markets try to anticipate the future, and they anticipate a future that's not good for the dollar. And that's why the dollar is weak against countries like Britain, the pound. Britain is a total mess now. The euro, much of Europe is still doing very badly, and yet the dollar's been weak against those currencies. It should be the other way around. So it's a crisis of confidence in the dollar, what you're seeing in the gold price. And by the way you cure it is for the Federal Reserve and our Treasury Department to say they both believe in a sound and stable dollar, and that we're not going to try to debase the greenback, reduce its value.
On the live with Steve Forbes, another factor that's been mentioned in the rise of gold is this drama between the White House and the Federal Reserve over the White House pushing for the firing of one of the Fed governors. What about that drama, and is that in fact a factor that's potentially rattling the markets?
Well, a lot of observers are saying the markets are rattled because it'll threaten the independence of the Fed.
Right.
But the real battle is, how should the Fed be operated? What should be their operating management philosophy? Unfortunately, the Fed believes that prosperity causes inflation, that if people are doing well, we're going to get inflation. That theory, which goes back decades, has been proved false again and again in the real world experience. But at the Federal Reserve and at other central banks, unfortunately, is holy writ. And what that means is that the Federal Reserve kept interest rates too high. Also, they did it for, I think, base political reasons. But I think the battle ultimately, whether Lisa Cook, current governor under spotlight now, keeps her seat short-term or not, eventually the administration is going to have its people on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. And they I hope, don't pursue a weak dollar policy. So it's not the independence of the Fed. It's that the Fed has the wrong philosophy, and the administration, when it comes to the dollar, I'm afraid, has the wrong philosophy. So you put two bad philosophies together, and that's one reason why you're seeing the gold doing what it's doing. And again, it can be easily solved by both parties declaring, we don't want to cheapen the dollar. We don't want to devalue the dollar. We want the dollar stable. I think that would go a long ways to solving the crisis. As for Governor Lisa Cook, I think eventually she will be leaving the Federal Reserve Board. And certainly within the next few months, the administration will get their people on the Federal Reserve Board.
Another big story, of course, the Federal Appeals Court on Friday ruling that most of President Trump's global tariffs were illegal. This could go all the way to the Supreme Court, another layer of uncertainty here. Your reaction to that and its potential impact on the markets and the economy?
Well, the tariffs, I think, are beginning to really bite in terms of affecting businesses. The uncertainty they've created, and the back and forth yo-yo like every day we seem to get new news on tariffs here, tariffs there. Not helped by President Trump putting, for example, a 50% tariff on Brazil because he doesn't like how they're treating their former president. The former president of Brazil is being ill-treated, but you don't respond by a 50% tariff that is going to be wrecking a lot of businesses and hurting businesses in the U.S. So I think the president is right to ask the Supreme Court to expedite the situation. I think the Supreme Court will rule that tariffs are indeed a tax, which they are, and that only Congress can impose taxes. That will render null and void most of the tariffs that President Trump has imposed. There are other ways to impose tariffs, which he's done in the past on various sectors. There are various sectors of the law that allow that to be done. But the broad-based ones, I think, will go by the boards. And then the question becomes, will the tariffs that have already been collected have to be refunded? I think the Supreme Court is going to try to dance on that and say, no, you just can't collect them in the future, but the past is the past. And they're not going to try to do rebates, demand rebates.
On your live with Steve Forbes. The other big story with the U.S. government taking a stake in Intel and talk about the social capitalism with the administration looking to invest in other big companies, maybe defense contractors and nuclear firms. What's your reaction to this developing story?
I'm afraid it's negative. Governments owning companies is a recipe for stagnation. And so suddenly a company doesn't try to do the best it can in whatever business is involved in, but now it has political overlords, and politics often has different objectives than what consumers want or get in the marketplace. So it's never worked in the past, and I'm afraid that it's really a bad news for Intel, even though short term they see it as a lifeline. Sadly, the company, once great company, has been mismanaged. Once a font of fantastic innovation has gone on stale times, you might say. So and also taking shares in the it's a form of statism. It's a form of socialism, and whatever you call it, statism, corporatism, socialism, whatever name you want to give to it, it's not a good thing. By the way, Frank, it is a conflict of interest. You own a piece of Lockheed, for example. So if Lockheed charges a lot for its weapons, by the golly, that increases the value of the shares of the government owns. So there's a conflict of interest there. So no, leave the private sector. Don't take shares in the private sector. Let shareholders own the shares, not the government.
Steve Forbes, thank you very much for covering all the bases here, and appreciate it very much. I look forward to your coverage in Forbes magazine, and I look for you on Fox as well. Steve Forbes, chairman of Forbes Media, which includes Forbes magazine, author of numerous books, his latest, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Mr. Forbes, thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
All the best. Thank you very much. Out to the freeways now, 790 KBC.
Headed to SoFi Stadium? Ride the Culver City Bus Line 99, the SoFi Express. Just $2 base fare for a round trip from Westfield, Culver City on weekend game days. We're hiring too. Learn more at culvercitybus.com or call 310-253-6500.
Football season is here. Oh, man. Believe has the podcast to enhance your football experience.
We got to embarrass them into doing things the right way.
From the pros.
Definitely one of the most interesting quarterback rooms ever.
To college.
Michigan is set at 8.5 wins.
To fantasy.
If you feel that way, why didn't you trade him?
Become a better fan and listen to the football podcasts from Believe.
Oh, man.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. Good afternoon. A very challenging year for businesses here in Southern California following the disastrous firestorm in January that devastated the Palisades as well as Malibu and Altadena. The natural disaster on top of other business concerns are weighing heavily here. Joining us live now is Joyce Coffey, who is the co-author of the book, The Resilience Advantage, a small business guide to preparing for floods, heat waves, wildfires, and other disasters. Joyce Coffey, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Well, thanks for having me, Frank. Lovely to be here, and glad to be talking with you about these incredibly important issues.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for taking the call here. First of all, the unthinkable happened in January this year with this deadly and devastating storm that devastated so many homes and businesses. This devastating firestorm started as a windstorm, by the way, as you may have heard. What's your reaction to this epic disaster that this area is still reeling from?
Yeah, well, I want to start where you just ended. First, that you all have not been forgotten. This is an extraordinary tragedy, and it has rippled throughout the U.S. and around the world. I'm in Chicago, and it absolutely continues to be top of mind for me. One thing that I find really striking about the disaster and the impact it had on California is that it is something that impacted not only households but also business. And we don't hear about that much in the news, but it's certainly very much what's happening for the 40% of Californians that work in the small business sector. And I'm afraid that many of the data that we have nationwide might end up applying to California, which is that 40% of small businesses never reopen after a disaster. And that's partially why I wrote this book, because the financial loss and the emotional toll of not reopening is just too great to be even imagined. And it's something we actually have the power to change.
Excellent point there. And as far as small business people reeling from this now, obviously insurance issues and rebuilding itself is becoming a big issue for the residents as well as for the business people. What does it take to persevere in a disaster like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's true, of course, that small businesses are scrambling right now to know their policies and to be in touch with their insurance brokers and to try to get the money that they're owed. But I think also many of them have come to terms very quickly with the fact that insurance is actually not going to be the salvation that they might have thought it was at one time. So one of the major things that we really want to emphasize is that insurance is sort of the last resort in terms of what you rely on for your resilience. And the first thing, of course, is to identify your risks. And I know it's hard to do that in the midst of this crisis, but small business owners are the grittiest, mightiest, most courageous of people, and they understand that they're not going to let this incredible crisis go to waste. So, identifying your risks and then figuring out how to protect, your people first, obviously, and your property, and your income really requires something that's fundamental to the insurance equation, which is organizing your critical information. So, one can do that now. It's obviously much better to do it before the storm and before the crisis hits. And we really try to emphasize, taking the 20 minutes to an hour of videoing all of your materials, getting your information up on the cloud as you did for COVID, but might not be continuing as best practice. And then, I think one thing we're really clear on, and I'll end here, I'm sure you have other questions, is just that a lot of small businesses have a disaster plan, 26%, which you might say, well, Joyce, that's not very much. But when you think about all that a CEO at a small business is grappling with, it's kind of amazing that a quarter of them actually have a plan. But the gap that I think is really important for all of us to acknowledge and do something about is that 94% of small businesses believe that they're ready. They believe they're ready to handle these disasters. And sadly, really beyond even our imagination, that 94% is who's grappling right now with the fact that their insurance isn't what they thought it was, and that they might not be able to reopen, or certainly not reopen as quickly as they wanted. So closing that gap between the 26% who have a disaster plan, making that more like 90%, so that there are more small businesses that are really taking advantage of resilience as an opportunity to not only be prepared for the next crisis, but actually to earn more market share, serve your customers, build trust with them, and of course, protect your employees.
Well, Joyce, thank you very much. I wish we had more time, but thank you very much for raising those important points here in the midst of this ongoing recovery here, and we look forward to speaking with you again. Joyce Coffey's with us, founder and president of Climate Resilience Consulting, and the co-author of the book, The Resilience Advantage, a small business guide to preparing for floods, heat waves, wildfires, and other disasters. Joyce Coffey, thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thank you, and my thoughts are with all of you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And out to the freeways now, 790 KABC.
Headed to SoFi Stadium? Skip the traffic and ride the Culver City Bus Line 99, the SoFi Express, your direct $2 base fare round-trip ride from the Culver City Transit Center at Westfield, Culver City. Buses run on weekend game days every 20 minutes starting 3 hours before kickoff, with return service beginning at the start of the third quarter. And guess what else? We're hiring. Join our team and help keep the community moving. Visit culvercitybus.com or call 310-253-6500 for info on your next ride to the game, or maybe your next job.
Hi, I'm Joe Saul-Sehy, host of the Stacking Benjamins podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about what if you came across $50,000. What would you do?
Put it into a tax-advantaged retirement account.
The mortgage, that's what we do.
Make a down payment on a home.
Something nice.
Buying a vehicle.
A separate bucket for this addition that we're adding.
$50,000, I'll buy a new podcast
You'll
partner.
buy new friends. And we're done. Thanks for playing, everybody. We're out of here.
Stacking Benjamins. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Let's get right to it. The Honorable Dennis ZINE is on the line, former LA City Council member, longtime LAPD sergeant with something like 50-plus years of service to the City of Angels. Important ruling says President Trump could not have troops here to enforce laws, help law enforcement here in the Los Angeles area. Give us your reaction to this big news and what's the impact out there, Dennis ZINE.
Well, Frank, in all honesty, the Los Angeles Police Department mobilized, which means everyone was put on uniformed 24-hour shifts, and everyone was working 12 hours. So 24 hours, round the clock, 12-hour shifts, on and off, and everyone, including detectives, everyone in uniform. A mobilization then brings in the Sheriff's Department, allied agencies. So the LAPD was beefed up for that. They did not use the National Guard or any of the other armed resources. They were able to contain the situation, and it was a small area that was impacted by the situation. So while we talk about the military and the National Guard, the U.S. Army, et cetera, the other branches of the military, they're there for major emergencies. This was a situation that was handled locally with the local authorities. Now, when we go to a mobilization, that means extreme situation. We don't have enough personnel. I will tell you, as of the 30th of August, there are 8,702 officers from the rank of chief of police to the recruit in the academy, 8,702 for the entire city of Los Angeles. Clearly, it's not sufficient numbers. So when you mobilize, which we already don't do that, this was an extreme circumstance, it shows how desperate we are for personnel. But in all honesty, they did not use the Guard or any of the military that came to Los Angeles. So they were basically protecting the federal properties that were impacted by the demonstrators. But people need to understand, 8,702 is not sufficient numbers to protect the entire area of Los Angeles, which goes from the Valley to San Pedro, east and west. It's just an incredible number, and these folks in the LAPD are overworked, and the burnout rate is getting worse because there's not enough personnel. But to clear the situation out, the federal people protected federal properties. They were not engaged in local law enforcement, and that is the honest truth of the matter.
On there live with Dennis ZINE, on the line with Dennis ZINE on this, and so we are following this development very, very closely. That California sued over the deployment of the troops, saying it violates the prohibition against using of the military for enforcement of domestic laws. So it looks like this is still playing out here. It looks like some of the troops apparently are still in place protecting the federal facilities, but it remains to be seen how long that's going to continue. Closer to home here in Southern California, a lot of discussion about funding on Prop 36. I did a big forum last week with the DA and Nathan Hochman, the LA County Sheriff, and the interim police chief of Torrance, and certainly Nathan Hochman pushing for more funding for Prop 36, which is the proposition that was overwhelmingly approved last November, which basically overturned a lot of Prop 47. And apparently in Sacramento, they're very slow to fund fully fund Prop 36. What do you think needs to be done about that?
Well, clearly it needs to be funded, and I commend our district attorney. He's done a tremendous job with the resources that he has, and he's turned around public attitude and the public perception of safety in Los Angeles, and law enforcement is very happy to have him on board. But when you look at the propositions, the governor wants to water it down, and our district attorney and law enforcement wants to strengthen it. You've got criminals who are perpetrating crimes all over the place, and while the numbers we show them, I'll give you an example of the very serious crime of murder. We talk about a reduction. As of 2025, 182 murders in Los Angeles compared to 200 in 2024. So from 182, it was 200. So from 200 to 182, it's a reduction, but a slight reduction. So when you look about the smash and grabs, the takeovers, when the street takeovers, and they go and rip off the stores, that's a proposition that needs to be handled, and we need to have prosecution, and we have a DA that's going to do it. Give him the tools to do the job, and the governor is resistant in doing that. So public safety is in jeopardy when you don't have that ability to prosecute. You can arrest all the people in the world, but if you don't prosecute them, nothing happens. It's a merry-go-round. And that's what we have under Gascon. Thank goodness he's gone. But we don't want to have that under our current DA, and our current DA is trying to overcome that situation that was basically the merry-go-round, in and out of jail and back committing crimes again.
And the point was made certainly at that forum and others when we had the DA on this program last week as well, that it appears that we're not seeing as many smash and grab situations lately because shoplifters are starting to be prosecuted. Right, the whole situation has changed as far as how law enforcement looks at these crimes now. What's being said about this on the front line, which you are still a part of?
Well, what it said is we see some activity where there's people held for their activities. When you don't hold them for their activities, they say, well, nothing happened. I got arrested. I was booked, and I'm released, and I'm back doing the same thing. Home Depot, they had a major raid recently confiscating property that was stolen from Home Depots. This is a situation where you have the street takeovers, and they'll break into any store that surrounds the area with the street takeovers. It's really gotten to the point that if we don't get a prosecution and incarceration for these people, it just progressively gets worse. Again, with the lack of resources, and I keep emphasizing, 8,702 officers for the entire city of Los Angeles. That number is frightening when it comes to civil disobedience and any type of crime that takes place. And how long does it take them to respond in the police car to get there? We just don't have sufficient numbers to really protect LA as it should be protected. And that's the honest truth. And people need to realize that. Until they get on their elected officials to say, do something to increase these numbers, we'll continue having these crimes. But the DA is doing a phenomenal job with the resources that he has for him in his office.
All right. Well, Dennis ZINE, thank you very much for coming to the line as we continue to track what's happening on the local scene on the crime front. Still one of the biggest issues facing businesses here in the Los Angeles area. The Honorable Dennis ZINE, former LA City Council member and former LAPD sergeant with 50-plus years of service in the city of Angels. Thank you again for your service, Dennis ZINE, and thank you very much for coming to the line.
You're welcome. Good day, Frank.
Thank you very much. Recapping the day on Wall Street, we saw a mixed finish today with the Dow down 25 points, the S&P 500 up 33, and the NASDAQ up 218. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.22%. Gold continues to hover at or near all-time highs. Right now, pulling back about $18 at $3,617 an ounce. Silver at $41.72 an ounce, and platinum at $1,441 an ounce. Bitcoin just shy of 112,000. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Headed to SoFi Stadium? Ride the Culver City Bus Line 99, the SoFi Express. Just $2 base fare for a round trip from Westfield Culver City on weekend game days. We're hiring too. Learn more at culvercitybus.com or call 310-253-6500.